My name is Engebretsen and I am the Portfolio Manager here for Barwon's Disability Accommodation Fund. Barwon's been looking at this sector for a couple of years now, and we're starting to build out a really great, robust portfolio in the space. And I thought it'd be great today to just run through a little bit of SDA 101 for some of those who might not be so familiar with the space, to give everyone a bit of context. So, SDA. Well, firstly, let's start off with talking a little bit around the NDIS. So the SDA is a funding package within the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So the history of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is the purpose of which is to provide a funding for supports of those with severe and permanent disabilities so that they can exhibit choice and control of how their care is delivered. It was initially started around conversations in 2009, ending up with a Productivity Commission report in 2011, which looked at the old way that disability sector was funded and found it was quite inefficient and just not a good form of funding, and it prevented a lot of people from getting the support they needed. So over the preceding couple of years, the NDIS scheme was designed and the Act came in 2013. After a trial period, the NDIS was deemed to be a successful program. It was rolled out across Australia from 2015. And here we are in 2022, and there's over 500,000 Australians, known as participants within the NDIS, who are supported by the scheme. And that's at an annual budget at the moment of $35 billion a year. Within that 500,000 cohort, there's around about 17,000 people today that are SDA funded participants, and that total income or payments for rents is around about $231 million a year. Looking forward, into 2030, the estimates at the moment are that 850,000 people will be supported by the scheme, and there'll be 28,000 SDA funded participants living in SDA approved dwellings at a total rental payments of around $700 million a year for the industry. So kind of what is specialist disability accommodation like? What does it kind of look and feel like? Well, at the end of the day, it's a residential accommodation. It's a residential accommodation funding package that's provided to eligible participants to pay the rent for dwellings that meet very strict design requirements and are enrolled and accredited under the NDIS. So it can't just be any typical home. The homes are specifically designed and optimally located to enable greater independence and community integration. So previously, there wasn't a specific asset class for disability housing. You would find a lot of people with disabilities in larger group homes or institutional environments. And there was even 6,000 people aged under 65 who are in aged care accommodation, a kind of accommodation that was a stage of last resort because there was no other opportunities for them to have kind of care in the home. Looking forward to where we are now, the scheme was brought in about 2016. So after the kind of first 4 to 5 years of the scheme running, we've got a really thriving but still growing SDA sector. And so these houses, as I mentioned before, are specifically designed. They have assistive technology in the home. They have fixtures and fittings which can be adaptable and accessible by people with wheelchairs and a range of different disabilities. And so overall, these homes are giving people much greater independence and autonomy over their lives, which is a fantastic thing to see. So what kind of participants, noting that it's only about 17,000 out of the 500,000 that are supported by the NDIS, what kind of participants are in SDA? Well, if we think at the moment, there's around 16,972 SDA funded participants, and around 66% of those come from 3 primary disability groups, being intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, and autism. When someone wants to actually get SDA funding on their plan, they firstly identify that they would like to have a housing solution, a housing goal on their plan, and they go out and they start to explore options. They have an occupational therapist undertake functional assessments, and a support coordinator compiles and submits the report and the request to the National Disability Insurance Agency, which controls and manages the scheme. Once that's approved, they're given an approval for a level of funding, which is based on their category of need, the number of people they're determined to be sharing with, and the location of that accommodation. When that participant is funded, they're able to go out to the market and they select a home, and once they move in, the SDA provider, who is the kind of tenant and property manager for that residence is able to start claiming payments by invoicing the government. So I wanted to talk to everyone a little bit about the types of accommodation that we're seeing in SDA and the things that really kind of interest Barwon. I would say broadly, it's multifaceted. It looks and feels like traditional residential, but we would probably term those different accommodation types in 3 different buckets. Firstly is standalone dwelling. So that's detached house, townhouse or villas. We'd see those typically clustered together in 1 to 3 dwellings plus a carer's unit, or we call an on-site overnight assistance room. The second bucket is a planned community where we'll actually fund, build or acquire a whole apartment building of anywhere between 4 to 15 apartments, again, plus on-site overnight assistance carers accommodation. And then lastly, we'll consider integrated communities, and that's where we'll buy upwards of 10 residential units that meet the SDA specifications, of course, plus a overnight assistance accommodation room within a much larger residential development. And out of that, you get this salt and peppered kind of nature of the housing, and you get that real integration within that community. Here at Barwon, we're actually looking at all 3 buckets of accommodation. We tend to be a very participant-led organisation. So participant-led means is kind of the opposite of speculatively building, where we actually go out and form terrific partnerships with high-quality SDA operators who have fantastic SIL partners, and we'll get onto a couple of those definitions in a minute, to make sure that when we actually are financing or acquiring real estate in this sector, that we're doing it with the end participant in mind about what type of dwelling they want to live in, where they want to live, so that we make sure we have a good product that is well utilised by the cohort deemed to use it. When we think about the amount of funding per participant, when someone goes and applies for a particular type of SDA funding from the NDIA, there's a few different factors which influence that. Firstly is the SDA category I mentioned before, of which there's 4: improved livability, fully accessible, robust and high physical support. And each of those have slightly different design requirements. The second kind of pillar is the building type and how many people will be sharing in that accommodation. So you'll have a different funding package for group homes, a house, attached dwelling, so villa, duplex or townhouse, as well as apartments. And then you've also got some minor adjustment factors. So whether or not the property has an on-site overnight assistance accommodation, whether there's a breakout room, whether the property has fire sprinklers, and lastly, the location factor. And so there's a location factor changing that rate all across Australia to some way account for the land price differential across different areas of Australia. Now, when thinking about developing, owning and operating really high quality, good SDA, it's really important to think about the stakeholders involved. So then we've identified 4 key stakeholder groups in this sector. First and foremost, it is the SDA participant and their network of influencers and advisors around them. So that might be their family, their carers, their support workers, or their plan managers. All of these people need to be engaged and excited about the accommodation you're going to be providing. Secondly, we have the SIL provider or the supported independent living provider, and they're the ones actually providing care into the home, and they will also need to have a plan approval for SIL to be able to provide that care into that residence. Next is actually the specialist disability accommodation provider. Now think of this like a tenant manager and a property manager combined. So they will actually have the direct relationship with the participant, manage health, safety and compliance, repairs and maintenance and all those kinds of aspects of the dwelling. And then lastly, of course, we have the developer, the owners of those buildings, such as Barwon, whose responsibility is making sure that the home is fit for purpose, safe, and enrolled in the NDIS so that the participant is able to apply their funding to that home. Now, with all these stakeholders, we have to just talk a little bit about the interplay between them and the contractual arrangements that make this all happen. So firstly, once the SDA participant is funded, they go out and they review the market and they select a dwelling that they would like to live in where there's occupancy available. They engage directly with the SDA provider, and they will sign into an RTA, or residential tenancy agreement, or an SDA service agreement. Once that resident is in the home, they will then be able to submit an invoice to the government and claim on that participant's what's called service booking number, and then the NDIS will pay the SDA provider that monthly amount that they're due. From there, the SDA provider will pay the property owner their portion of the rent, and that relationship is managed by a lease. These are a little bit different than your traditional residential agreements. This is more of a commercial style lease, so these will be in the order of 10 years plus 5 and 10 years options. And broadly, we can see those leases fall into two key categories. First is fixed rent, so it's just a fixed rent due each month. And then the second version is a pass-through lease. And under that lease, the SDA provider will simply deduct their management fee and pass through the balance of the rent. So obviously under the pass-through, the property owner takes more of that vacancy risk. And under a fixed rent head lease, the SDA provider manages that vacancy risk. So now we have a bit of context around about the structure of the SDA and how it all comes together and the stakeholders involved. I thought it'd be good to take everyone through a little bit about where we sit currently in terms of the rollout of the scheme and in terms of where participant demand currently is. So where we sit at the moment, beginning of 2022, there's around about 17,000 people that are currently funded with SDA. The NDIS projects and estimates that when the scheme is fully up and running, there will be 28,000 Australians, 28,000 participants who will need SDA. So from where we stand now, there's around about another 11 to 12,000 people that will need to be housed in SDA accommodation. That's growing at about 11% CAGR, and we think that'll mature in about 5 years, so 2027. In terms of the annual rents of SDA, the story is a little bit different. At the moment, we're at 231 million per annum, and when the scheme fully matures, we'll be at 700 million a year in SDA rents paid to the market. So that's going to grow from here at around about 25% compounded annual growth. And the reason for that is, well, firstly, we've got more people entering the scheme. But secondly, we see that there'll be more people transitioning out of older aged legacy stock called existing or legacy under the NDIS, which is funded at a much lower level. And so we expect some of those people to transition into new SDA, which is funded at a much higher level. And then if we think about where we are in terms of the dwelling supply at the moment, we identify that now there's around about 2,462 homes already new built in the SDA scheme. So those are properties built since 2016, 2017. Currently in the pipeline, we've got around about another 2,000. But to get where we need to be in 2027 is for those 28,000 places, we're going to need another 13,000 places or beds across Australia. And so we're talking around about 4,750 new build properties required over the next 5 years to house those 28,000 participants. And if we just think about capital investment to get through this future unidentified pipeline at the moment, we're looking at about 5 to 6 billion of future pipeline that we need to fund, and the private market needs to come and provide capital for. And there's also a universe now of investable assets of around about 2.5 to 3 billion. And so if we just take a kind of a think back or step back and just look, where do we think that demand supply is going to play out across Australia? What we've done is we've taken the latest data, which was produced by the NDIA each quarter, and the latest quarter being the end of December. We've had a little bit of a look at where we think there might be undersupply or oversupply across Australia. It's fair to say that a significant amount of building to date has occurred on the east coast of Australia, and there's been a lot of supply come on in southeast Queensland. And so what we're actually seeing in Queensland at the moment is a total possible aggregate oversupply, particularly for high physical support category participants. which makes it more and more important for looking at those particular properties that you're looking to acquire, making sure that it's really in the top 10 to 20% of desirable and aspirational SDA properties so that you minimise the possibility of any vacancy risk. But if we look across the rest of Australia, there's actually a severe undersupply of accommodation, most notably in New South Wales and Victoria. Partly, that SDA accommodation has been held back by the high land prices and the types of return not really stacking up. But we believe that'll moderate over time as more entrants, a review of funding, and change of the land supply dynamics comes into place. So, New South Wales undersupplied by about 3,000, ACT 100, Victoria might be another 4,000, Tasmania 300, South Australia about 1,400 places, and Western Australia, where Barwon is building 8 properties, underserviced by about 1,000 new places. So I hope that's given everyone a little bit of context of where we are at the moment in SDA and kind of a little bit of an insight into where the sector is heading. We're going to jump into the Q&A in a second. So I'd like everyone to just have a bit of a think around their questions and what they might like to put to the expert, fantastic panel we've got on today. But in the meantime, we're just going to jump through to a quick virtual tour of one of these SDA properties. So you can have a bit of a look and feel about what these actually look like. So as you've got here, we've got the living room of the ESQ project, which is actually an Access Accom property, which Helen Wood can speak to later in this call. And we're just going to do a quick fly through of the property. So this is out in Penrith in Sydney. It's a 1-bedroom SDA property. As you can see, there is some modifications to the level of appliances. You've got a movable kitchen bench. You've got pull-down cupboards and pull-out cupboards as well. And all the purpose of these design requirements and specifications is to help someone in a wheelchair have better accessibility and independence in really taking care of themselves within the home. We've got enlarged balconies with 0-step threshold through the property. We've got access direct to large bathrooms with wider windows. We've got an ability to push back the shower curtain. We've got a sink there which you can fit a wheelchair under. And all of these aspects in this spec is brought together to really, as I said, deliver a fantastic living experience for someone with a disability.